Hey everyone, this is the Mind Workshop Podcast. I'm your host, Victor Dwyer, and today we have Jill on, and we're going to be talking about the grit and its power to positively alter the course of your journey. I'm really excited to get into it. Jill, please tell the audience about who you are and how you got into all this.
Hi everyone, so I'm Jill Hollander. I'm an empowerment coach and speaker. I got into this through my own major health journeys. I was born with a health challenge of being born with a heart defect, 2 open heart surgeries, a heart transplant. And through that, I learned strategies and approaches that helped me to keep going through all the hard and how to really find my voice so I can find myself. And now I help others so that they can do the same.
Wow, I love that. And I think it's like I haven't been through half of like even that like 10-second thing that you just said. I haven't been through even like remotely close to that. And what do you think was the what do you think got you through that? Was is it grit? Was it grit? Was it gratitude? What was the main foundation of how you could go through something like that?
I truly believe that we all have like a fighter within, and we can learn ways to access it. And I think that when we're put in certain situations, we find a way. And also, it is hard, and not all the time can we find a way. So that's why I also want to talk to people when it does feel hard, when you do feel stuck, because there are resources, there are support, there are ways to get help, even when it feels very, very challenging.
Yeah.
And I think for me, honestly, it was the family support and the models I was given from my parents that helped me, because I was born with a health challenge. So they helped to model for me how to live my life a certain way with health challenges. So I think it does, we are all affected by our circumstances and our families and all of that. And that all plays a role, but no matter what, we can rise.
Yeah. And what would be your, I feel like a lot of people out there want to do things that like involve getting into hard situations. For example, like working out. Most people out there want to work out, and they want to adapt and making where their bodies are better. And a lot of people just don't want to go through the work in order to do that. So what would be your advice to someone to gain the motivation to work out or to do something that is hard for them?
Always go to your why. Why are you doing it? Why are you starting? What is your reason? What is your internal voice telling you? Why do you need to do this? Why do you need to do it now? Start there. And to keep you going, you can create a buddy system. You can find an exercise that you do enjoy, because if you enjoy something, you're more likely to do it. But to start, I always feel it comes from within and your own reason why.
Yeah. And I want to go into your point about name it, claim it, and change it. I think that's, I love that. I love that slogan. Can you go into what that means?
Yes. So it really comes down to naming what's going on, where you're at this moment. And then claiming that, claiming how you feel about that, claiming the hard stuff about that. And through that, you can get support to travel through the feelings and the emotions and to get through it. And because once we name what's going on and really claim our feelings and the hard stuff about it, then it's not stuck in the dark. Then we can start to change it. It's come out to the light. So now it's brought forward so we can create change.
Yeah. And I think a piece of that, and when it comes to claiming it, I think one of the hardest part is to a lot of us, like, for example, when it comes to sadness or pain and things like that, we have this, we feel shame when we have those emotions, saying that, hey, I'm not supposed to feel sad. I'm not supposed to feel pain. And we shame that because of like our culture and the way we grow up. And it's really important to like know that these are normal human emotions. It's okay to feel pain. It's okay to feel sadness. And that was a big game changer for me. And once I was able to realize that, I was like, wow, like I can actually do something about it. Because the way emotions work, before you name anything, it's like this like big ball of spaghetti. It's kind of like this whole like jumbled mess. And then once we name it, now we have a categorization. We have a box for kind of what we have something to cling to. So now rather than this like emotion of like sadness, now once we have the word for it, it's like, okay, I'm feeling sad. Cool. And now you're able to really interact with it and like really like saying, okay, why am I sad? It's like, oh,
Mhm.
it's because of this random thing. And like I have conversations with myself all the time. I just literally like video myself and have a conversation with myself.
I love
Because that's what I do for fun, apparently. But anyway, rant like I'd be like, hey, why am I feeling sad right now? And it'll be off some random memory, some random thing that happened
Mhm.
this day that like totally caught me off guard. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. But the brain is gonna make these associations regardless if we do it, but you have to ask why. So that's gonna be
Yeah.
a very important thing is you have to ask why behind them.
Yeah,
So
keep going deeper and deeper. And that's why some people getting support can be very helpful because it is scary. It can be big. And also, we have been told, whether societal or family beliefs, that these emotions may be things that we don't talk about, or like what you said, can create shame. So it's really important to first convince, like, you have to first believe
yeah.
that it's important and that you can do it, and that to break the shame. And by doing, to get rid of shame, you have to share it with somebody, to say it to someone, to define that safe space. If you have been, if you know, did grow up that way, or if you do feel societal standards, or you just feel shame around it, go and share it with someone that feels safe, because just getting it out will reduce that shame.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And like it comes down to like acceptance. Like you got to accept it. Like if it's in there and you're constantly repressing it, it's gonna come out in unhealthy ways. And like
Especially
it's so important to like
if it's the
saying,
first
"Hey,
time.
this is what I'm feeling."
Yeah. It keeps knocking and it gets louder each time when you don't hear the call initially. So
Yes.
we've all, I mean, I've definitely been there where I will blow off the small little warnings, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, okay, you got really loud. Got it. Like,
Yeah, and it's when you repress something, you have to remember it's kind of like I use the term the lion in the cage. So when
Mm,
you keep repressing something and you keep it locked up and you finally like it finally bursts through, it becomes like this enraging thing. And it's like clawing and screaming and like doing everything else like that. But that's when people like say, "Oh, that can't happen again," and then they do the same thing, and that it comes out, and then like only at the worst moments. But if you just honestly let it talk, like let the emotion of like the emotion of sadness, like let's just say if you just
mhm.
let it kind of happen, then it eventually goes away.
Yeah.
Rather than repressing it, it like literally, if you like, for example, I'll have this conversation with myself where I'll be like, "I'm feeling sad, and I don't know why." And then like I'll have a conversation like expressing that emotion of sadness, and then after I kind of get out what I wanted to say, like that's all I needed. Like I feel completely happy afterward. So it really comes down to like letting it express itself rather
Yes.
than keeping it repressed, and then it makes it where you're more whole of a person. And it comes down to accepting that emotion, number one, and then willing to have that conversation with it, not locking it up and saying, hey, like I don't know what the heck is going on, but like let's have this conversation, let's figure it out. And
Let's figure
I
it
do that
out.
across all the different emotions I have in my brain.
I love that. I always
Mhm.
have been a very like reactive person, but it allows me to get my emotions out. So I, when information comes, I'll kind of just feel it.
Mhm.
It will just process through me. And sometimes it's in a big way. When I also do these set, like, to allow myself to feel the emotions when it is big. I'll do set like
Mhm.
pity parties. But then what happens for me is I wind up like I'm hearing all the negative, and there are truth to some of that. Sometimes it's really big stuff that I've gone through, and it is hard and it is scary and all of that. But after a period of time, I'm like, okay, enough. I'm all done. I'm done with this
Yeah.
pity party. It's time to move on. So having those conversations, having a process that works for you, can really help you to then create the change, to be ready to create the change.
Mhm. And I want to talk a little bit about toxic voices as well.
Mm.
So I had this horrible, horrible voice inside of me, which was like a toxic female type of voice,
Hmm.
where it was like, I was like, hey, how can we figure out how to be on a team and like work together? That's kind of how I talk to the voices in my head.
Hmm.
And the voice was like, ew, I would never be on a team with you. You're disgusting. I would never want to be with you. And that was the conversation I had. And it was really, really hard to like
Yeah.
have that initial conversation. And it was something that I wanted to repress, but it was because normally every voice inside insecure voice is usually pretty easy. You just give it love, and then basically the voice is happy. That's most of the voices in my head. That's usually how it works. But this one was like very, very against that, like having that toxic voice inside of you where I wanted to repress it. And it really kind of shook me to my core a little bit. And eventually I had that conversation with that toxic voice inside my head saying, hey, we both have the same insecurities. We're both insecure on the way we look. So we need to figure out how to be on the same team to solve these insecurities inside of us. And then it was like, oh, okay, I mean, I guess I can team up with you for that. And then eventually we developed a stronger relationship with ourselves. And now, like, we have a very good relationship. I know that sounds crazy because it's all in my head, but like the relationship with these characters, with these voices is so crucial because the people hate themselves because of the relationship with these voices in their head. That voice would have lived with me my entire life if I did not have that conversation where she would have always said, ew, you're disgusting. I would never be on your team. That would have happened through till the day I died. But until I had that conversation, realizing, hey, this person is there, I'm going to have this conversation with myself, and then figuring out how to be on a team. And now, like, we're in a good relationship with all the pieces of myself, and now we're able to do that. But it all starts with having that conversation and realizing that these voices are there for a reason. Like, they're happening. They may be imaginary, but they're there for a reason. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, and they're so interesting. So much of that I like could really resonate with, because I often say to my clients, like, when they hear the different voices, especially the critical voice, like, whose voice is that really? I have them like question. Is it from, is it a voice from a critical parent? Is it a voice from society? Is it a voice from a bully? Like, where does that come from? And is that really true to you? Like, whose voice is it? Let's name that voice, who that is, so we can get rid of that and invite your own in. And I love the idea of making friends with. I've done that with different like things that have come up for me health-wise. I was like, all right, we got to live together, so let's work together. Exactly what you did. It works so well after a while. I mean, at first I'm like, you don't want to be befriended. A little resistance can come in. But then once you do, it really, what you're saying, you find a way to coexist and to make it work.
Yeah. And I usually say before someone gets into, it's usually called shadow work, before they like start having these conversations, it's very important to have some level of people skills at some level, and then some level of like emotional stability, and then also some level of alphaness. And the reason why is because I'm a super alpha, and I try to be a very emotionally stable person, but that toxic character that was inside of me, that shook me. I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, I'm very alpha. Like, no one's going to be more alpha than me. But that voice was so alpha against me that I was like, who am I? Like, it really shook me to my core, because it was like I would never team up with you. You're disgusting. Like that, like it hurt me. So like it hurt me really bad, actually. And then eventually, as I kept having conversations with it, it eventually got better and better and better. But like, I always say it's important to like have those prerequisites before you start doing shadow work, just in case another alpha voice comes into your life, or a big emotional shaking voice that happens that ends up hurting you, because you're going to find those voices that you repress, and they're going to come out clawing and screaming at the very beginning. But as you continue to have that conversation and get everyone on the same team, that's when you can start to understand the dynamics, the people dynamics inside of yourself. And I like naming them personally, like naming these certain characters. So that way I have something to grasp. You know how talking about claiming it? Like, I have something to grasp when I name them. I'm like, oh, this person's talking right now. Cool. Like, let's have this conversation. What's upsetting you? And then like, it'll be like, oh, like this is what's happening. Because we don't realize this. A lot of these conversations are happening in the background of our brain that we have no idea. Like, the conscious awareness is only seeing probably 10%, if not less, of the conversations that we actually have. So if you're just walking and all of a sudden you're like, get offended, I'll literally go like, okay, where in my brain, what conversation happened that offended me? Because something happened in my brain that I did not cause. And then I'll eventually find that conversation that happened. But it's important to realize this. Like, we think we're having control, that like the conscious awareness conversation, that's the only one that's happening. But there's these things that are constantly happening in the background, and these conversations are happening without our conscious awareness. So it's really important to understand that, so that way you have a little bit more control of what's going on inside your head.
Yeah, I think when you go deeper like this, it is so important. I've worked with a therapist for years, at different times, and I find that so helpful too, because you have a safe space with someone that understands the psychological perspective and all of that for this to unfold. Because that's how I found the process that really works for me, by working with a therapist. Because to go there and really claim your feelings can be really scary, and to find a safe way to do it, to work with a
Yeah.
therapist helped me to find my safe way to do it. So that's something I highly suggest too, as you want to start to explore your feelings more so that you can create change. Working with a
Mhm.
therapist can really be a great avenue.
And it's important, it's so important not to judge your thoughts. And a lot of things will happen, like a lot of these random thoughts come in, where, like, for example, like, you might have a thought saying, "Oh, I'm feeling so sad, I'm feeling so vulnerable," but then you might judge those thoughts saying, "Hey, stop being a wussy, like, come on, pick it up." And then, like, you don't have to feel this pain and shame. And from there you just repress those thoughts. And so it's important to understand that there is a reason why they are there. Yes, they are imaginary, they are happening in your brain, but there's a reason why they're popping up, or they wouldn't have popped up in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's important to realize that, and letting yourself have that conversation with yourself, rather than shutting it down saying, "Hey, don't be a wussy, like, don't think about that." Like, instead you could say, "Hey, like, okay, you're sad, okay, cool, why, like, what's going on, tell me why you're sad." And being open, because as soon as you start judging these thoughts, they're going to want to hide, and then they're going to come out in weird ways that are going to manipulate you in some odd way. They're going to come out in other ways that you have no idea. And it's important to have that conversation with yourself saying, "Hey, what's going on here?" And it goes a long way. So it's really important there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's
Any
important to have those
anything else you want to add to
conversations.
that?
I just think that also it shows you sometimes, if you keep if you keep hearing the same inner dialogue, it could be telling you the areas where you really need to go deeper, to look further, or to see where you can create that change. What's the disconnect? Like, where, so if you're really feeling or hearing a lot of the critical voice, like, why? And how are you
Mhm.
feeling about yourself? And how can you put a stop to it? And I think sometimes creating boundaries can come involved, where you could just say, I'm not going to let myself treat myself this way. So I'm going to
Mhm.
find a different way to do it. And then you can create different voices that are more loving, creating mantras that to replace some of the negative or critical voices, I have found to be very helpful for myself and clients. So those are some things too to also consider when you're talking about all these, because we're constantly hearing thoughts in our own minds, and we
Mhm.
want to find a way to have them work for us and not against us.
Yeah. And I want to get your thoughts, because so many people these days hate themselves. And they express it in different ways by having more money, more cars, like all the
Mm.
big house and everything else, so that way other people can love them and love themselves. What is your advice when it comes to changing these characters, these voices inside our head, to becoming more loving of ourselves? Because so many people hate each other right now, hate themselves, which therefore hate each other because of it. So, what can people do to take away those negative thoughts?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think
Mhm.
what people can really begin is realize we've been living from the outside in for so long. And it's so important. It's something that has come up for me in the last few years, to really live from the inside out. Because when we start to, just that idea, for people just to start to think about that concept of, instead of living externally, to start to live from the inside out. Because if you start to name that idea, that I want something that I'm not doing, that, so you first can just name that. And then once you name that, it's kind of set like a goal, like a structure, like you were saying before. And then you can your mind can create a beeline towards thinking, how can I help myself create that? And that's where, like, mantras, I've done a lot with, like, positive poems that have helped me to, like, keep going and persevere when things are hard. So it first has to come from this idea of what it is that you notice that isn't working. Because if you notice that the money and the cars and the showing and the doing isn't making you feel any better, then you need to look at it from a different perspective. And all that isn't going to matter if you don't feel it within. If you don't feel worthy within yourself, you can show up with $1 million dripped all over you and you still can feel totally unseen and completely not confident. So it really comes from working within and going back to this self-talk and how you talk to yourself, and start to notice how you talk to yourself. And if you're not aware yet, start to write down start to have a time where you could just be aware, whether it's a meditative practice or just time to be. And when the thoughts come up, take notice of them, write them down so you can be aware of what type of thoughts you're having. And then you can know where to begin to start. So that's something I think could be helpful.
And I'm so big on the team mentality. Like, that's how I treat it in my head, is like all these certain characters, we're a team. Like, we're all trapped in the same mind. We are not going anywhere. So it's like kind of what you were saying. Like, we're all here. We're all going to live with each other for the rest of our lives. So how can we figure out how to have a positive conversation, and what can we do to work on that? And it makes it, the more conversations that you have like this, the easier it gets, saying, okay, what, like, for example, I have this insecure version of myself where it's like a vulnerable child, and really that vulnerable child just needs love. And it's like, okay, cool. I get, here's love. Here's a hug. Boom. Okay, awesome. Did I solve everything? And they go, yeah, I'm fine now. And then every single one of these characters, they have their own needs, their motivations and things like that. And the way we can express this is, for example, I can be working and be super serious, where I'm like business Victor and I'm just working, being serious. And then literally within 2 seconds, my friend can call me and I can answer my phone and be like, hey, what's up, my man? Hey, what's up? And I, like, everything about my identity, my motivations, everything about me changed within a second. Now, I'm crazy, but I'm not really crazy. But if an alien looked at that, they'd be like, oh, this is one of the crazy humans. But like, no, like, this is how us humans normally are. Like, we change based off the environment around us. And that's where these characters, we pull based off the environment around us. So business Victor might pull voices that are super serious, that are focused on working and things like that. But as soon as my friend calls, it's going to be a whole other set of identities, motivations, and everything else. And it's important to realize that they have other sets of goals that you don't even have access to until you talk with them. So that's why a lot of us that are unaware with these thoughts inside of us, they're contradicting everything that goes on. They might say, oh, I want this, but then I want that, then I want this, then I want that. It's because the relationship within their head is not harmonious. They're not working toward the same goal. They're saying, oh, I want all these different things. Like, I want to have a nice body, but I also want to watch Netflix. It's all these funny things. And until you realize these characters inside of our head, you're going to be able to identify all these different personalities that are inside of you that are going to go a long way. What are your thoughts on that?
I think what struck me is how influenced we are by our environment and what we're around in the setting. How, like, the setting, if you're at work, you can get one response from yourself and from the people around you, and then when you go with other people, and that's why it's so important to choose work environments and people that work for you, that bring you joy, and it doesn't have to be day, but that passion. I think that's one way that we can get through things when things get hard, because if we're surrounding ourselves with people that support us, that encourage us, and different types of people, because I've found my support squad, which is one of the ways that I can cope and deal, is really finding people that bring out different aspects of myself. Like you were saying, the one that brings, like, the cheerleader that helps me to feel better about myself. And then the one that gives me a little bit of tough love and is like, okay, now you got to get it together. Enough with the pity party and let's get going. So I think it's like, we really need also to think about the environments in which we're putting ourselves and really consider how, or if they're working for us, and if they're not, what changes. And sometimes it can be very small changes. I'm a very big believer in, like, micro steps or baby steps so that you can get to your goal without feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah. And always remember that if you ever want a voice that's strengthened, the content you feed your mind determines the strength of that character. So, for example, when I was first getting into this journey, I was really lacking that nurturing mother voice inside of me. I have an amazing mom, so, like, that was there. But for some reason, inside of my head, I was lacking that like nurturing mother voice. And what I did was I started looking at more content saying, hey, it's okay to love yourself. It's okay to have these emotions. It's okay to like do all these things. And saying like, it's okay to love myself. And what that did was it strengthened that voice inside of my head from whatever it is. So if you ever have a voice that you're wanting to strengthen, just pick, literally, we live in a digital age where you can feed the content. You, like in the past, it was the 5 people around you, but now it's the content you consume. That's what voices you're going to end up strengthening. So if you have a lot of hatred voices inside of yourself that hate who you are and everything else, and you want to strengthen the other side, you can start listening to more positive content, and that will actually strengthen those positive characters inside of you, and it gives them a lot more power to do things. And that way they're going to able to have those conversations. Now, I'm not saying to repress the negative voices, but it's going to give them the strength to have that conversation to go back and forth. So rather than it's just the negative voice saying, oh, I hate the way I look, and just like letting that be it, then it's going, okay, why do I hate the way I look? Oh, it's because of my beard or whatever it is. And then you're able to have that conversation go back and forth, and you're able to start dialing down to exactly what it is. So if you want to strengthen a particular voice, like pick what content you want to consume, and I guarantee there's a video out there for it.
The content and what we watch, what we listen to makes so much of a difference. My clients have literally like silenced certain pages or not watched certain news stations, and it's made such a difference, because if you just shut it off, or you put it in a file where you can reach it if you need it, but not have it constantly consume you, it makes such a difference, because it really does in the social media world, in the world we're in. And also the idea of like, especially when we're on social media, we need to remember that a lot of, especially like the beauty constructs and all that, it's apples and oranges. You don't know if you're looking at someone that's had X amount of work done or no work done, and like what filters they're using and all of that. So I think that like you really need to pick content that serves you and that feels good to you, and silence the rest.
And it's also important to note that if you're in a negative mind state, you are going to have confirmation bias to prove whatever your current identity is. Meaning that if you hate yourself, you're going to look at content that reinforces that hatred towards yourself. And you have to consciously, there's a reason why we're given consciousness to actively go against that and start looking at more positive content. At first, it's not going to resonate with you. You're going to not believe what they say. But over time, as these positive voices inside your head strengthen, you are going to develop that positive voice inside your head to counter those negative voices. But people get stuck in this negative loop cycle because of confirmation bias, where they're reinforcing the hatred toward themselves and looking at content that resonates with them. But the more you start looking at positive content, the more you'll start believing it. Right? At first, you won't believe it, but then you could say, wow, I guess I can love myself. And then you'll start to say, okay, I kind of do love myself. And then you'll start having those conversations with yourself. But you have to break that cycle. You have to stop looking at negative content. You got to break that cycle of always being negative and breaking that confirmation bias.
Yeah. What I hear also from that is that this idea of how you let people treat you and how you're treating yourself, because that is also that whole confirmation bias. Because if you are feeling negative and you let, it's that whole loop that you can't be treated any better, you can't do any better. And it's that same idea of going back to yourself, going back to within, and going back to that concept of why and how can you get help to get you to the idea of wanting to be treated better, so that you are looking for the content that can serve you, are setting boundaries so that people don't treat you ways that aren't good for you, that don't treat you and don't further your self-esteem and self-confidence. If anything, if they bring it down and you're allowing that, that's a question to start asking. Why? What's underneath that? And who can help me to make those changes?
Yeah, that's true too. Like there's usually an insecurity or a fear of some type that's making you get caught in that loop cycle. Meaning that like I would always hate the way my body looked, and I would always work out to counter that. And it was because I thought that, oh, once I looked like that, then someone could love me, then
Mm,
I can love myself. So that was the steps I took in order to say, okay, I need to have a perfect body. Once I have a perfect body, then someone could
mm,
love me, then I can love myself. And then I realized like that's just stupid. Like the whole thing is just stupid. It's like, hey, I can love myself for who I am right now. Like that's a thing. And I eventually realized that. But it's important not to be caught in that cycle. And if you're in a negative cycle of hating yourself in the way you are right now, there's probably a reason behind it. And a lot of people probably go through the same thing where they're trying to have that perfect body. Then they say, oh, then that person can love me. Then I can love myself. But the everything comes with it within. Even if you hypothetically, you're never going to have a perfect body, no matter how skinny you get, no matter how, like, I would always try to be perfect, have a perfect body, but it would never get there.
mm,
And it's a never
mm,
ending goal. And if you rely on those external factors saying, hey, then someone can love me, then I can love myself, you're never going to be happy. You're always going to be
mm,
chasing more. You're always going to want more money. You're always going to want to have a better body.
mm,
And it's important to say, hey, what are the reasons why I cannot love myself right now? It's like, okay, I'm fat. Okay, cool. Why does me being fat have any correlation to me loving myself? I'd be like,
mm,
well,
mm.
because I have to. Well, I have to. And it's like, well, like I guess there is no reason. Like there's no correlation. There isn't. It's just funny how we shame those things. But if you have the conversation, then you start to see how stupid it is. Really, honestly.
And I really think it goes back to these benchmarks, this societal standards that we think
Yeah.
that these are the people that are happy. These are the people that are making moves and, making things change. But like, that's really not ever really know because no one knows what some benchmarks. It really is a process, I think, for so many of us, especially if we have a tendency to be perfectionistic, which I definitely have. And I try to like really be aware of that so that I don't do it because there's no perfect, like you were saying, there's no like that just doesn't really exist. So the more we focus on that and those unrealistic benchmarks and also unrealistic expectations, I think that's a big thing that a lot of people do. We have these expectations that just are not in line with the reality, and we either overshoot or undershoot in certain ways. So I think it's
Yeah.
really important to be able to gauge our expectations of certain things as
Yeah.
well.
And can you go into how, like, a lot of us create goals off what society says, and whether to have the nice car, to have the
Mm,
nice house, to have lots of money, and we generate our goals off what society says rather than our goals that we have. And you talked a
yes.
little bit about when you have a goal to ask why behind that goal. How else can someone be motivated by knowing that it's really their goal, not their insecurities, not
Yeah.
society? How can someone else produce a goal that is true to them to where it's actually a goal they want to pursue rather than just running away from something?
Mm, that's a great question.
And
So
it's a
how
loaded
do you
question.
know?
There's a lot to
I
it.
love it. I feel like where I really begin, it's with finding your own voice. You have to start with your own voice because there's so much external that what is it that you really want, but it's beyond that because like we were talking about before, we have other people's opinions and all that come through our thoughts as well constantly. So I think it really is creating a space. I actually did a post about this the other day of somewhere where you can find a space for you, just you, to hear your own thoughts. Like I've been rollerblading and then walking at this park for years and like listening to music and just it's kind of like something that I do to clear my mind. I love to exercise and it's a good way for me to focus on me. What do I really want? Because I've definitely
Mhm.
been there. I mean, with my work path, I was totally influenced by my mom, my sister. I my what we want. It's tell everyone else no. Like my voice in the medical world has always been super strong and unwavering from a very young age. And I think for me is because I always knew that there was such big stake. And I felt like if I didn't get involved, who else could really help me? Like, my parents were phenomenal and supportive, but this was just something that I felt within, that fighter within, that I felt like I needed to be a part of. So I think that there are certain areas, if you look at your life, where your voice comes out more easily, more authentically, and look at that area and start to look at how that happens for you. What is it about that specific area of your life that helps you to speak up more and more authentically? And then help yourself by viewing that and taking those traits to apply it to areas where it's not as strong.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the root cause of unhappiness for me for a long time was because of the voice of the inner critic saying that I'm not good enough. You got to be working, and judging kind of like all the different thoughts inside of myself. And I think like the biggest thing, game changer for me, was like, hey, I'm going to sit down. I'm just going to write like everything that comes to my mind. I'm just going to write down. And it was like 3 paragraphs long of just the inner critic saying, oh, I got to be working. I got to be doing this. You're fat. You got to be working out. Like all these things to like, just to try to get me to work. And I'm like, why? Like, why do we have to work so hard? And it's like, because like this is literally the conversation. It's like, because progress is everything. Like we have to have progress. Without progress, we're nothing. And it's like, okay, why? It's because we're working to try to be a better version of ourselves. Okay, why? So that way someone can love us. Okay, why do we need someone else to love us? So then we can love ourselves. So it always comes down to the same thing. It has the same pattern where I would be addicted to progress, but the reason was because I thought that would be the key to someone loving me and me loving myself. But in reality, it's just like, hey, I could love myself for who I am right now. I don't need to be progressing like 14 hours a day in order to love myself. Like I can love myself for exactly who I am. And that was a big game changer mindset shift when it comes down to the inner critic. Any thoughts on that?
Sorry, I think some of it cut out on my end.
You're good. You're good.
Yeah, okay, awesome.
I was basically talking. Do you have any other insights when it comes down to the inner critic? And like when it comes down to tackling, having that conversation with your inner critic?
I think so much of what we experience about living from the outside in is because we don't want to go and look within, because so many of us bully ourselves. We become our own worst bullies, honestly, and our own worst enemies. And like, it really is such a phenomenon, really, because I found myself getting like negative at different points in my life. And it's like, honestly, like what is so challenging is also so empowering and helpful, because the challenges that I have in my health, especially when they're really serious, they help me to keep in check. How do I really want to live? What do I really want to be doing? And so each time I get to reevaluate that for myself. And so now it's really about like, I'm going to do things that make me happy. I'm going to be around people that make me happy. It comes from really this idea, like, I want to sit, making ourselves, it can be so hard and as it is. We need to all cut ourselves a break and be gentle with ourselves, because we're doing much better than we ever think we are. It's like unbelievable, because we all have these voices in our head. And if you ask somebody like, oh my, you're doing so great, look at this, look at that, and it's the same, and you're like, oh, nothing's happening. I'm not doing well. I'm not doing this. And so sometimes I talk to people and I say, first, start with someone, but can't find them within yourself. If someone wrote you a beautiful letter, highlight it and say it over to yourself. Put it into like Louis' like mirror work, and you look in the mirror and you're not, I love myself. Start to look at the words of other people. See if any of them start to resonate, because you can there. Sometimes from the inside out, you need to also, which is kind of like a hypocritical thing to say, but you have to also begin externally, because if that's where you're living, then begin there. Begin where you already are and start there. So start with the external, start with what the people say that feels good to you, and then start to see how you can integrate that into your own. How can you replace those words with some of the critical words? So to try to begin at that place could be something that could be helpful. And then reading poems or little words of affirmation, I always found uplifting to get me out of the funk or to get me to replace some of the harder, scarier thoughts that I was having. And music. If you can't, even just to get a break, because if you just use it as a break at first, you'll also see that some of the lyrics, if you look for them, can be so inspiring and motivating to get you, because sometimes if you think about your thoughts too much, it can drive you crazy and get too overwhelming. So if you take a break and you just listen to music and let your body move a little bit, kind of get out of your head and into your body. And then you get to look at things differently too, which is why I love to exercise the first thing in the morning, because I feel like it gets me right out of my head and into the movement. So that's another way to look at it as well.
And you made me have an insight about, if you really think about it, like the bullies that affected you are the ones that are going, the bullies that bothered you, that annoyed you, are the ones you're going to adopt and pick up inside of your brain, if you really think about it. So let's say a bully comes up to me and says, "Hey, you're short." I'm gonna be like, "Bro, I don't even care." Like, and then I'm not even gonna remember it. Like, it's not even gonna bother me. But if a bully came up to me and say, "Hey, your body's like your body's disgusting," then that would affect me, and I would be like, "Oh crap, that hurts me," and then my mind's gonna pick up that piece of information and say, "Hey, this information is important because I have a strong emotional response to it." And then that voice is going to cycle and be built off, like every time a bully bothers me. So you have to think about that we go through our entire lives building out like these, like almost like the perfect bully. If you really think about it, if we're only remembering and giving that emotional response to what the bully says, all the worst things that have been said to us is like that perfect bully, essentially the one that says all the worst things. And that's usually our inner critic that says all these things to get us to do some type of action. And it's important to realize that we can go through our whole lives building this perfect bully to manipulate us however we want. And that's where we really have to like identify that and saying, "Hey, whatever the bully says, hey, your body's fat, hey, you're disgusting, whatever it may be, no one could love that." Like, that's where we have to have a conversation and say, "Hey, okay, why is that?" And it's like, "Oh, because this and this and this." And they can go down to what the underlying fear cause is. Is it the fear of no one loving you, the fear of not loving yourself, the fear of not being comfortable with who you are? Like, usually every insecurity comes down to a fear of something. And that's where you can go and tackle it and figure out, why did it bother you in the first place? And once you tackle that root cause, then what that bully said or what that bully voice is can no longer bother you, because you tackled the root under emotional cause behind it. So
Yes.
what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think is the beginning and the end, right? It's like so absolutely the root cause is so essential, but we don't always get there for a while. It's all that we're talking about can be a very long process. So what I also think can be helpful with this idea of like the bully and the inner bully, I have always felt, and this is where like my therapist always really helped me too, was like anger channeled like in healthy ways can be so effective for motivation, because you could be like, "Okay, bully, I see you. Let's go. Like, I'll show you. You're not going to stop me. I'm going to find a way to make this better." And I feel like for me, like the hard stuff has always been that, like, no, I don't want this. So what can I do? So I think it can be very motivating also if you find a way and someone that can help you, if you do feel that you have an angry response, how to channel that in a healthy way. Because a lot of times anger comes before sadness. Like, it's almost just like layers. Like, we have all these shields covering ourselves and trying to protect ourselves. So as we take off each shield, we'll get closer and closer to the root. So a lot of times we're going to get all these messy emotions before we get even near the root. So it can be a process. So while you're doing it to make it a little easier, some of these emotions can be helpful and fuel you to make the changes as you're getting closer to the root.
So almost like the actionable advice that someone can take away from this is basically, first of all, being aware of that inner bully that you have inside of you, number one. And then second thing is, if you don't think you're strong enough to counter that yet, then you can watch some videos on self-love, on positive body image, whatever it may be, to build up the strength to counter that voice. And then third thing is to have that conversation saying, okay, why are you saying these things? What is the purpose of all this? And having that conversation inside of yourself. Because it kind of goes down to like, I had a toxic person inside of my like voice saying, hey, like I would never team up with you. And that was kind of be like my inner bully almost, basically. And once you kind of get that communication factor down, then it comes down to like, hey, what is some common grounds that we can be on the same team with? What do we agree on? What can, like, there's gonna be a million things that we disagree on. Cool, awesome. Now, what are things that we can agree on? And then that's when I talk to that like toxic person inside of me saying, hey, like we both have the same insecurities. Cool. Now let's figure out a plan to like counter that and become more an effective team. And that's kind of been the way I've been able to go through these like inner bullies inside of my head and kind of counter it in a way. What are your thoughts? Did I lose you there? Oh, Joe was there. Jill, can you hear us? Jill, can you hear us? Oh, snap. She lost connection. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you, everyone. Oh, wait, she's actually back on.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
I'm
Jill,
back.
can you hear us?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes, I
Beautiful.
can. I just got the
Yes,
message.
you're
Yeah.
all good. Um, Basically, I was talking about like the actionable plan about like basically being more toxic. Anyway, that this is actually a perfect segue. That's all we have time for today. Jill, please tell the audience how to find you, how to find more about your business, and all that good stuff.
Absolutely. You can find me on Instagram at I am Jill Hollander, and we can connect more there. There's also a link there to my website and other things. So check me out on Instagram.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe, for joining. And I want to thank all our viewers for engaging in our live session here at the Mind Workshop Podcast. Great news, guys. The Mind Workshop Podcast will be on Spotify and Apple Podcasts in September. And you'll be able to tune into your favorite episodes on the go. Again, we are live Wednesdays and Thursdays from 12 to 3 p.m. Central, and it's all made possibly by Cross Skills VAs. And that's all we have time for today. Jill, thank you so much for joining, and we'll catch you guys.